Hey everyone, welcome back. It's been a week since the election, and with the majority of races called and the data rolling in, I thought it was appropriate to revisit my pre-election video where I discussed some of the things that I was going to be watching and talk about how things turned out and what information we can draw from the results. So let's get started. The first thing I was watching was, of course, the Arizona governor's election, and thankfully, Katie Hobbs is projected to be the winner over Kari Lake. Now, Kari Lake has not conceded and has already begun to claim voter fraud without any evidence, but to be fair, that was expected. But the bigger takeaway from this was that election deniers in competitive races across the board did very poorly in this election cycle, and that is frankly a very good thing for democracy. It means that there were, in addition to Democrats, independents, and even Republicans who looked at these election denial claims and said, "It's been 2 years. You've not produced any evidence of this despite claiming that you have all the evidence in the world, and frankly, we can't trust you on this anymore. And if we can't trust you on something like the elections, we can't really trust you on anything, so why should we vote you into public office?" I think the fact that people are making these decisions, and yes, some of the margins were close, but the fact that it is at least coming out against people who are denying the validity and security of U.S. elections is a good thing for the future of the American experiment. The next question was, of course, who will control the Senate, and the answer to that is the Democrats. The only question outstanding is what will their majority be, and we'll find that out once we know the results of the runoff in Georgia. But the question we were asking, more importantly, was, does candidate quality matter? Republicans nominated a number of subpar candidates, and some did poorly, but some did very well. You had Dr. Mehmet Oz in Pennsylvania and Blake Masters in Arizona lose both of their races, while J.D. Vance in Ohio and Herschel Walker in Georgia did very well, with J.D. Vance winning and Herschel Walker securing enough votes to make it to the next round of the runoff. And the split between these candidates, I think, comes down to actually who else was on the ticket. In both Arizona and Pennsylvania, the gubernatorial candidates were less than popular, and while Blake Masters actually did worse than Kari Lake, there may have been some people who were discouraged from coming out to vote at all on the Republican side, saying, "I don't want to vote for Kari Lake, I don't really like Blake Masters," didn't come out. Same thing in Pennsylvania. Doug Mastriano was an election denier and had said a bunch of other very controversial things over the course of the campaign that Mehmet Oz had avoided saying, and I think there were a lot of moderate Republicans who simply said, "I'm not going to engage in this," and either voted Democrat or stayed home, and that cost those two candidates a lot. However, with J.D. Vance in Ohio and Herschel Walker in Georgia, they both had the advantage of having very popular governors also on the ballot. Brian Kemp and Mike DeWine both did very well in their re-election bids, and their popularity may have drawn out Republican voters who would have otherwise not voted. And they just came out, voted a straight Republican ticket, and that really gave a boost to both of the candidates. We'll be able to make a better assessment after we see the results of the December runoff in Georgia. If we see a drop-off in support for Herschel Walker, then we might be able to infer that Brian Kemp really did help drag him along for the ride and make him a viable candidate. However, if he maintains his support, then we have much better evidence to support our hypothesis that Republicans care less and less about the quality of the candidate, and it simply matters that they have an R after their name. We'll have to wait and see what happens in that runoff, but overall it seems like the entirety of the ticket has a very significant impact on the outcome of these very close elections. The next question I asked was, how powerful will the Freedom Caucus be? And the answer is very powerful. Right now, the majority in the House hasn't been decided as of time of filming, but it looks highly likely that the Republicans will get the majority, albeit with a razor-thin margin. And this is already giving Kevin McCarthy some issues. He was challenged in the election to become the nominee from the Republican Party for the speakership by Andy Biggs of the Freedom Caucus, but he managed to get a few key endorsements from the likes of Marjorie Taylor Greene in order to help him secure enough votes from his caucus to make it into the official race. Now, why did she do that when Representative Matt Gaetz and other members of the Freedom Caucus backed Andy Biggs? I think Marjorie Taylor Greene is onto something here. I think she's figuring that If she and her kind can get Kevin McCarthy in the Speaker's chair and prevent the Democrats from getting someone of their choice with a couple of breakaway Republicans, they can essentially put Kevin McCarthy under their thumb and say, look, we put you here, we can also take this away from you. So then they can get the outsized influence they want in the party's agenda, secure the chairmanships of key committees, and overall generally drag the Republican agenda much farther to the right than it otherwise would be. And this puts Kevin McCarthy in a bind, especially with a Democratic-controlled Senate. He now has to decide, well, do I essentially stall the entire government and go full obstructionist and hang out with the Freedom Caucus, which the whole MAGA thing didn't really do well for Republicans in this past election cycle, or do I compromise, do I work with both Democrats in the House as well as the Democratic-controlled Senate, and risk alienating the Trump wing of the party base? It's really a tough position for him to manage, especially because the Freedom Caucus is going to continue to be a very loud voice and one that controls very definitively the Republican majority. So I think overall, Kevin McCarthy is in for a world of problems, and I absolutely wish him the best of luck in controlling the Freedom Caucus, because he's going to need it. The last question I asked was, who's actually going to turn out and vote? In a previous video, I discussed some possible risk factors for polling errors, one being an undercount of conservative voters, and the other being an undercount of unlikely voters and specifically younger voters. As it turned out, as we look at the data, there really wasn't an undercount of conservatives, and some of the more conservative pollsters like Trafalgar Group seem to have heavily overestimated conservative turnout, leading to a shift in the polling averages, which gave us that impression of this being a red wave year, which it certainly was not. But the group that did turn out and vote that was not anticipated was young people. But the very interesting thing about younger voter turnout was that it was very localized. It wasn't high across the board. And I think the thing that explains it all is that young people, across any generation, any time, want to change the world, and they really want to see that impact. And in races like, let's say, for instance, Kentucky or my home state of Illinois, some races feel like a foregone conclusion. A Republican's going to win statewide in Kentucky. A Democrat's going to win statewide in Illinois, no matter what the votes are. Now, I know that's not true, any given Sunday something can happen, but there is that feeling, and it can make you feel like, what does my vote really matter? And that can depress turnout among young voters. But in key races in Arizona, Nevada, Georgia, Pennsylvania, they did feel like their vote was going to matter. They're like, here is my chance to put my voice out there and pick this important candidate from my state. And they showed up in large numbers. A lot of times, enough numbers to swing the election to the Democratic Party and away from Republicans. The big takeaway from this is that now, young voters know that they can change the outcome of elections. Republicans know that too now, but we'll discuss their reaction in a separate video. Back to our younger voters, they've gotten a real taste of what it's like to participate in the democratic process and have their votes influence the outcome. And frankly, again, across all of human history, once you give someone a taste for power, and they know that they can really impact something and change it to the way they want to see it happen, they're not going to let go of that power anytime soon. So, I think this is going to be an election cycle that really motivates young voters and shows them that, yes, your vote does matter, and I think we can expect to see increasingly higher turnout among younger voters as they feel that they can have an impact in maybe other unlikely races. We'll have to wait and see. To sum it all up, this was an election that defied historical trends. Instead of suffering significant losses, Democrats were able to hold on to their Senate majority with the possibility of expanding it in the Georgia runoff, as well as keep their losses in the House to the absolute bare minimum. They did this with the assistance of young voters and by putting forward high-quality candidates in a variety of competitive elections. Meanwhile, the Republicans put forward candidates who were unqualified or questioned the fundamental principles of democracy without any evidence whatsoever, turning off a lot of moderate and independent voters that might otherwise have supported them on issues such as the economy and crime. Going forward, I think the Republican Party has a lot of soul-searching to do and has to make that critical decision of whether to return to their more centrist past or to continue down the extreme right-wing trend of the MAGA movement. We'll have to wait and see what choices both parties make as they move on to 2024. Think about it. Thanks for watching. If you want to see more of my content, subscribe to the channel and make sure to hit the bell icon so that you get notified whenever I post new videos. If you want to support me on my other social media platforms, all of the links you need will be in the video description below. If you have any questions about this video or another topic that you'd like me to discuss, leave me a comment and I'll do my best to get you an answer. Thanks again for watching, and have a great day.